It was the dead of night in December 1941, and Washington's corridors hushed in tension. Rumors raced through the White House. The Japanese had struck. The United States was at war. In his private study, Franklin Roosevelt stood alone by a map of the Pacific Theater, one hand on his forehead, the other trembling over a telephone. His face was drawn with exhaustion. He whispered, "This changes everything." And in that moment, the country held its breath, wondering if the man who had pulled America from its darkest economic abyss could now lead it through its greatest global nightmare. What followed was not just war strategy. It was a story of reinvention, moral courage, political risk, and leadership on a scale few leaders in history have matched. From the dusty towns brought low by the Great Depression to the blazing battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, Roosevelt's journey from New Deal architect to war commander reveals lessons about power, courage, and the price of leadership. Let me take you inside the real story of how Roosevelt's New Deal set the stage, how he pivoted to wartime leadership, and how that leadership shaped the modern world. In 1929, when the stock market crashed, it was more than money lost, it was confidence, dignity, hope. Factories closed, banks collapsed, and unemployment soared. Across America, families were burning furniture for warmth. Hoover, the sitting president, tried relief programs, but his hands seemed tied by ideology and old guard resistance. Then came Roosevelt, promising something audacious, not just patches, but a new direction. On his first day in office, he declared that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He moved swiftly, closing banks temporarily, setting up emergency relief efforts, and putting programs into motion faster than critics expected. He was bold, perhaps too bold for some. He brought in the brain trust, advisors from different disciplines, to help him experiment. Some programs failed or got struck down by courts, but others worked. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the Public Works Administration, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and eventually the Social Security Act would leave legacies for generations. This first phase is called the First New Deal. But Roosevelt knew that relief alone would not suffice. In 1935, he pushed a bolder set of reforms, the Second New Deal, passing the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, expanding work relief, social welfare, and stronger labor protections. Yet not everyone cheered. Conservative critics claimed he was overreaching, some left progressives claimed he was half-measure. The Supreme Court struck down portions of his agenda. But FDR kept adapting, maneuvering, pushing boundaries. In his Madison Square Garden speech in 1936, he lashed out at the old enemies of peace, business and financial monopoly, war profiteering. In that crowd's roar, his confidence solidified public support. By 1939, though, war clouds were gathering abroad. Germany had invaded Poland, Hitler was on the march. In the U.S., isolationist sentiment was strong. Many Americans were unwilling to entangle themselves in another European war. Roosevelt sensed the danger, but he had to prepare without provoking Congress or the public into tragedy. Historians sometimes say the emergency preceded the war. Roosevelt did not wait until Pearl Harbor to prepare. He took subtle, careful steps to pivot America's power toward global defense, all while staying within the bounds of public mood and constitutional constraints. He extended recognition to the Soviet Union, signaling that global alliances were reshaping. He softened trade barriers and pursued reciprocal trade agreements. He worked the Lend-Lease program. America would supply arms and goods to Britain, the Soviet Union, and others resisting Axis aggression, arguing that supplying them was essential for U.S. survival. In 1941, American warships began patrolling the Atlantic. If they met German U-boats, they would relay their positions to British Navy. It was a dangerous dance of neutrality and engagement. On the home front, the government beefed up industrial capacity even before war was declared, conversion of factories, boosting shipyards, preparing for rearmament. Roosevelt pressed Congress to authorize the Selective Service Act, instituting the first peacetime draft. Many balked, but Roosevelt sold it as necessary insurance. By the time Pearl Harbor happened on December 7, 1941, America was already shifting gears, some key wheels in motion. But let's pause at that night when Roosevelt got the news. He didn't erupt. He didn't panic. He was reportedly calm, measured, invoking the Constitution, consulting military leaders. He would later call December 7 a date which will live in infamy. From that moment, there was no turning back. It's one thing to promise recovery. It's another to run a war. For Roosevelt, the shift was profound. Overnight, his role expanded as commander-in-chief, as diplomat, as strategist. He took a central role in making war decisions, sometimes overruling generals, choosing field commanders, steering campaigns. He promoted the Europe First strategy, defeat Nazi Germany before fully confronting Japan. He supported massive industrial production, weapons, planes, tanks, ships. The U.S. became the arsenal of democracy. Under his watch, America and its allies invaded North Africa, Sicily and Italy, and then Normandy in 1944. Roosevelt didn't act alone. He held summit meetings with Churchill, often in secret, and with Stalin late in war, shaping the alliance and future peace. At the Quebec Conference in 1943, he and Churchill signed secret agreements on atomic bomb development. He foresaw nuclear weapons' role in post-war diplomacy. He coined the term United Nations to describe the alliance and planned for a post-war world order. None of this was easy. Roosevelt battled with Congress over budgets and war powers. He pushed boundaries on presidential authority, raising constitutional questions. He also faced moral dilemmas. Some critics argue he didn't do enough to help Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution under the pressure of domestic political constraints. He ordered internment of Japanese Americans on the West Coast, a decision now widely condemned, citing military necessity, though evidence suggests it was more reaction than strictly defense. In the fog of war, Roosevelt had to weigh civil liberties against perceived survival. Still, his resolve held the nation together. He was re-elected in 1944, though his health was failing. He spoke in terms of a Rooseveltian generational project: freedom from fear, security, economic rights, a new world order. But he didn't live to see final victory. He died in April 1945, months before Germany's surrender and Japan's capitulation. Here's where the real twist lies. You can't fully understand Roosevelt's Second World War leadership without seeing how the New Deal laid the foundation. First, the New Deal remade American institutions. It expanded the federal government's capacity to act, building bureaucracies, setting up regulatory agencies, reinforcing infrastructure, and mobilizing public resources. The government that could not respond adequately in 1929–30 became, by the late 1930s, an apparatus capable of war planning. Second, he gained political capital and public trust. America had lived through hardship and had come to lean on him. His speeches, radio fireside chats, bold experiments, and visible action earned him credibility. When he later asked for sacrifice, people believed him. The psychological bond mattered. Third, New Deal programs revived parts of the economy, preserving industrial capacity and social stability. Many regions, especially rural or backward ones, began catching up. That meant when war demand hit, the underlying bones of national productivity weren't entirely destroyed. Fourth, the New Deal's emphasis on infrastructure and human capital meant roads, bridges, dams, schools, and power lines expanded. These improvements had dual use, civilian and military. Factories could be repurposed, workforce skills retooled. Moreover, the networks Roosevelt built among states, local governments, labor, business formed a coalition that could be marshaled in wartime. Labor unions, for instance, accepted wartime constraints in exchange for guarantees and protections rather than sabotage. So the war effort did not spring from nothing. It was born in the New Deal soil. The pivot was swift but built on years of structural change. No grand narrative is without its dark moments. Roosevelt confronted some of his most challenging moral tests in office. 1. The Jewish refugee crisis. FDR's administration was slow in easing immigration restrictions, even as Nazi persecution intensified. Some scholars argue he prioritized domestic stability and political feasibility over moral urgency. Critics contend more could have been done. Defenders note the political constraints and isolationist sentiment he faced. 2. The Japanese internment. After Pearl Harbor, thousands of Japanese Americans, many U.S. citizens, were forced into internment camps. Roosevelt and his administration justified this as wartime security necessary to prevent sabotage. But historians now largely view it as a grave injustice, likely fueled by racism and panic more than evidence. Roosevelt's willingness to override civil liberties in the name of national security remains one of his darkest decisions. 3. The expansion of executive power during war. Roosevelt presided over an enlarged presidency. Some constitutional scholars argue he bent norms too far, but others argue that in extraordinary times such assertiveness was necessary to preserve democracy itself. 4. Balancing wartime alliances and post-war planning. At Yalta and other conferences, he had to make concessions to Stalin, whose regime would later become a threat. The seeds of the Cold War were planted under FDR's watch. Despite all this, Roosevelt's spirit remained steady. He understood that war was existential, and he believed the stakes were higher than any political calculation. By April 1945, victory in Europe was certain. Months later, in August, Japan surrendered after atomic bombs were dropped. Roosevelt had not lived to see the end, but under his leadership, the U.S. had emerged as a global superpower. The post-war world bore his imprint. The United Nations, which he championed, came into being. The Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank, were born in the new order. His vision of America as a global democracy leader endured. Domestically, many New Deal programs survived or morphed into the post-war welfare state. Social security became permanently embedded. Labor gained strength. The idea that government should play a role in reducing inequality and stabilizing economy became mainstream in modern liberal democracy. Yet his legacy is contested. Some criticize overreach, the internment, civil liberty compromises, the seeds of Soviet tension. Others laud him as the savior of American democracy and builder of the modern state. In the end, Roosevelt straddled crises few others faced. He guided a nation from desperation to global leadership. He experimented, adapted, compromised, and at times overstepped, but always under a sense that his choices mattered, that people looked to him in darkness. When I look back at Roosevelt's journey from New Deal to wartime leader, here's what strikes me: systems matter. You can't summon transformation overnight. The structures you build in calm times enable action in crisis. Trust is fragile but powerful. Roosevelt earned public faith over years. When the moment of reckoning came, people rallied behind him. Moral courage has costs. Some of his decisions hurt lives and principles. Great leaders sometimes choose lesser evils in impossible circumstances. Adaptation is essential. He didn't cling to one identity, he shifted from reformer to war leader to visionary diplomat. History is neither unalloyed praise nor condemnation. The best we can do is understand complexity and extract lessons. So here's my call to you, my viewers. If you found this story meaningful, like this video, share it with someone who loves history or leadership stories, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future tales like this. In the comments below, tell me, what do you think was Roosevelt's greatest strength? His greatest mistake? How do you see parallels in leadership today? Let's talk. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's remember, leadership is the story we tell through actions, not just words.